The dusty main street of Abilene, Kansas, fell silent the moment Eleanor Whitmore pulled out her leather-bound notebook and began calculating cattle prices in her head, announcing the exact profit margin before the auctioneer could finish his sentence. And it was 1878, a year when women were expected to concern themselves with needlework rather than numbers. Eleanor had arrived in Abilene 3 months prior with her widowed aunt, escaping the suffocating judgments of Boston society where her mathematical prowess had earned her nothing but sneers and warnings that no man would ever want a wife who could cipher better than he could. At 22 years old, she had resigned herself to a life of quiet spinsterhood, finding solace in the pages of her mathematics books while other young women her age busied themselves with courtship and marriage preparations. Her Aunt Martha had hoped the frontier town might offer Eleanor a fresh start, but small-town gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and soon enough, everyone knew about the strange Whitmore girl who spent her evenings working through algebra problems by candlelight instead of attending social gatherings at the church. The townspeople whispered behind gloved hands when Eleanor walked past, their words cutting deeper than any Kansas wind. The women called her unnatural, claiming that such intellectual pursuits would curdle her feminine nature and leave her bitter and alone. The men found her threatening, uncomfortable with a woman who could calculate compound interest faster than the bank manager and spot errors in ledgers with a single glance. Even the school teacher, a kindly older gentleman named Mr. Peterson, had gently suggested that Eleanor might find more happiness if she focused her energies on more appropriate hobbies like painting watercolors or learning new recipes. But Eleanor could no more stop loving mathematics than she could stop breathing. Numbers made sense to her in a way that the social expectations of her gender never had. In equations, there was no ambiguity, no double standards, no judgment. 2 plus 2 equaled 4, whether a man or woman calculated it. And that absolute truth brought her a peace that nothing else in her turbulent life could match. It was on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late July when everything changed. Eleanor sat on a bench outside the general store, her notebook balanced on her lap as she worked through a particularly challenging problem involving geometric progressions. The heat shimmered off the dirt road, and most sensible people had retreated indoors to escape the oppressive temperature, but Eleanor barely noticed her surroundings when she was deep in mathematical thought. She did not hear the horse approach until a shadow fell across her page. Looking up, Eleanor found herself staring at a pair of well-worn leather boots, her gaze traveling upward to take in long legs, a dusty brown vest, and finally a sun-weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The man standing before her appeared to be in his mid-20s with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. He held his hat in his hands now, revealing those dark curls plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble that carried a hint of uncertainty. "You are Eleanor Whitmore, are you not?" Eleanor closed her notebook protectively, bracing herself for whatever criticism or mockery was about to come. "I am. What business do you have with me?" The man shifted his weight, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "My name is James Garrett. I own the Double G Ranch about 5 miles west of town. I have been hearing things about you around town, and I was hoping we might speak privately about a business proposition." Her spine stiffened. "If you have come to lecture me about appropriate feminine behavior, I assure you that I have heard every possible variation already, Mr. Garrett." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, creating small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, despite the serious expression he currently wore. "Actually, Miss Whitmore, I was hoping to hire you." Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard him. "I beg your pardon?" James glanced around the nearly empty street before continuing, his voice lower now. "My ranch has been growing considerably over the past 2 years. We are running over 2,000 head of cattle now, plus horses, and I am employing 15 men full-time. The bookkeeping has become more than I can manage on my own, especially during busy seasons. I need someone who can keep accurate records, track expenses, calculate payroll, manage inventory, and project profits and losses. I need someone who understands numbers, really understands them, not just someone who can scratch out basic addition and subtraction." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of jest or cruelty, but found only earnest sincerity. "Why me? Surely there are bookkeepers in Abilene more qualified and more socially acceptable than I am." James settled his hat back on his head, tilting it back slightly so she could still see his eyes clearly. "I tried hiring the bank manager to do it part-time. He made 3 significant errors in the first month that cost me nearly $500. Then I tried doing it myself, but I am a rancher, not a mathematician. I spend half my time second-guessing my own calculations and the other half worrying that I've missed something important. Last week I overheard you at the auction correcting the auctioneer's mathematics. You did calculations in your head that would have taken me an hour with pencil and paper, and you were right. I checked. That is when I knew I needed to talk to you." Eleanor felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Mr. Garrett, you must understand that hiring me would likely damage your reputation in town. People already think I am strange. They will think you are strange for employing me." He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed remarkable indifference to public opinion. "I care more about running a successful ranch than I do about town gossip, Miss Whitmore. The question is whether you are interested. The work would be daily, Monday through Saturday. You would have your own workspace in the ranch office, and I would pay you $40 a month plus meals. That is more than fair wages for the work involved." $40 a month was more than fair. It was generous, nearly what a skilled craftsman might earn. Eleanor knew her aunt would be scandalized, knew that accepting this position would cement her status as the town eccentric, but when she looked into James Garrett's honest face, she could not bring herself to refuse. For the first time in her life, someone was not asking her to diminish herself, to hide her abilities, to pretend to be less than she was. Someone was asking her to use her mathematical mind, to put her skills to practical purpose, to be exactly who she was. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. The smile that broke across James Garrett's face was like sunrise after a long night. "Would tomorrow morning be too soon? I can pick you up at 8 o'clock and drive you out to the ranch myself. I will bring you back to town each evening, of course. Everything will be completely proper and respectable." Eleanor found herself smiling back, a genuine smile that felt foreign on her face after months of guarded expressions. "Tomorrow morning would be perfect, Mr. Garrett." That evening, as Eleanor had predicted, Aunt Martha expressed considerable concern about the arrangement. They sat in the small parlor of the boarding house, where they rented 2 rooms, and Eleanor patiently addressed each of her aunt's worries. Yes, she would be alone with Mr. Garrett during the daily drives to and from the ranch. No, she did not believe he had any improper intentions. Yes, she understood that this would further damage her already precarious social standing. No, she did not care. "Eleanor, dear," Aunt Martha said with a heavy sigh, setting down her embroidery, "I brought you to Kansas so you might have a chance at a normal life. Perhaps find a good man to marry, settle down properly. I fear this position will only make you more of an outcast." Eleanor reached over and squeezed her aunt's hand gently. "Aunt Martha, I appreciate everything you have done for me, truly I do. But I was an outcast in Boston, and I have been an outcast here. At least now I will be an outcast doing something I love, something I'm genuinely good at, and earning my own wages in the process. That means more to me than any amount of social acceptance." Her aunt studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You have your mother's stubborn streak, you know. Once she set her mind to something, there was no dissuading her. Very well, Eleanor, I will support your decision, but please, do be careful. A cattle ranch is no place for a young lady." Eleanor kissed her aunt's weathered cheek. "I promise to be careful." Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Abilene settling in for the evening, the distant laughter from the saloon, the occasional horse passing by, the wind whistling through the eaves. Her mind raced with possibilities, with the hope that tomorrow might mark the beginning of something wonderful, something that would finally make her feel as though she belonged somewhere in this world. James Garrett arrived precisely at 8 o'clock the following morning, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 handsome bay horses. He helped Eleanor up onto the seat beside him with easy courtesy, and they set off toward the ranch under a sky so blue and vast it seemed impossible. As they left town, Eleanor felt the eyes of early risers on them, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity. But as the buildings grew smaller behind them and the open prairie stretched out ahead, she felt something else too, a sense of freedom that she had not experienced since childhood, before the world had taught her that loving mathematics was something to be ashamed of. James proved to be pleasant company during the drive. He spoke about his ranch with obvious pride, explaining how he had started with nothing but a small herd and a lot of determination 7 years ago, when he was only 19 years old. His parents had died of fever when he was 17, leaving him with a modest inheritance that he had invested in land and cattle. Through hard work, smart decisions, and what he admitted was a fair amount of luck, he had built the Double G into one of the most successful operations in the county. "The Double G?" Eleanor asked. "Both for Garrett?" James nodded, but something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain. "The second G was for my younger brother, Gabriel. We were supposed to build this place together. He died 3 years ago, thrown from a horse that got spooked during a storm. I kept the name, though. It helps me remember what I'm working for, even if he is not here to see it." "I am sorry for your loss," Eleanor said softly, recognizing the grief in his voice, understanding it. She had lost her own parents when she was 16, her father to a heart condition, and her mother to the pneumonia that followed 6 months later, leaving her in the care of Aunt Martha. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. Gabriel would have liked you, I think. He was always interested in learning new things, never cared much what other people thought about his interests either." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Eleanor found herself studying James's profile when she thought he was not paying attention. He had strong features, a straight nose, a firm jawline covered with a day's worth of dark stubble. His hands on the reins were capable and sure, marked with calluses that spoke of hard physical labor. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, something that put her at ease despite her natural wariness around men. The Double G Ranch sprawled across a beautiful stretch of rolling prairie, with a creek running through the eastern portion that provided water for the livestock. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from local stone and timber, clearly constructed with care and meant to last. Nearby stood a large barn, several outbuildings, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and a separate building that James identified as the ranch office where Eleanor would be working. As James helped her down from the wagon, several ranch hands paused in their work to stare at the unexpected sight of a woman arriving with the boss. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. She had endured worse than curious stares. James led her to the office, a small but well-built structure with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Inside, Eleanor found a chaos that made her fingers itch to start organizing. Papers covered every available surface, ledgers lay open and scattered, receipts spilled out of boxes, and what appeared to be several years' worth of records were piled haphazardly in corners. "I know it is a disaster," James admitted, looking sheepish. "I kept falling further behind, and eventually I just started throwing everything in here with the intention of sorting it out later. Later never came." Eleanor set down her satchel and rolled up her sleeves, both literally and figuratively. "Show me your current system such as it is and explain what information you need to track." For the next hour, James walked her through the various aspects of ranch management, from cattle purchases and sales to employee wages, from feed costs to equipment maintenance, from seasonal expenses to yearly projections. Eleanor listened carefully, her mind already beginning to organize the information into categories and systems, seeing patterns and connections that would make tracking everything more efficient. "I need to understand the complete financial picture at any given time," James explained. "How much cash we have available, what we owe, what is owed to us, what our costs are running, whether we are operating at a profit or loss. During cattle drive season, things get especially complicated because I need to know exactly how much we are spending on trail hands, supplies, and transportation versus how much we will earn from the sale. Last year, I made what I thought was a significant profit. But when I finally got all the numbers together, I realized I had actually barely broken even because I had not properly accounted for all the expenses." Eleanor nodded, already forming a plan. What you need is a comprehensive bookkeeping system with daily entries, weekly summaries, and monthly reports. Everything needs to be categorized and cross-referenced so you can see both the details and the overall picture. It will take me some time to set up the system and enter all the historical data, but once it is in place, maintaining it will be straightforward. James looked at her with something approaching awe. You can really do all that? Mr. Garrett, this is what I love doing. Give me 2 weeks, and I will have your financial records in better order than they have ever been. She was true to her word. Eleanor threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised even herself. Each morning, James would collect her from town, and they would drive out to the ranch together, their conversations growing longer and more personal with each passing day. She learned about his childhood on a small farm in Missouri, his dreams of building something lasting and significant, his love of the land and the animals in his care. He learned about her lonely years in Boston, her parents who had encouraged her unusual interests, her frustration with a world that saw her abilities as defects rather than gifts. The ranch hands grew accustomed to her presence, though Eleanor could tell some of them disapproved of a woman working in such a capacity. The foreman, a grizzled 50-year-old named Frank Morrison, was particularly skeptical at first. But when Eleanor caught an error in his supply order that would have resulted in them ordering 3 times more grain than they needed at considerable expense, Frank grudgingly admitted that maybe having a head for figures was not such a bad thing after all. By the end of the second week, Eleanor had created a complete accounting system. She had designed separate ledgers for different aspects of the operation, all cross-referenced with a master ledger that showed the overall financial position. She had entered years of back records, catching and correcting numerous errors in the process. She had created forms for the ranch hands to fill out daily, tracking everything from feed consumption to fence repairs. She had established a filing system for receipts and correspondence. She had even created a projected budget for the next year based on historical patterns and James's plans for expansion. When she showed James the completed system, walking him through each component and explaining how everything connected, he stood speechless for several minutes, simply turning pages and staring at the neat columns of figures, the clear organization, the comprehensive reports. "Eleanor," he said finally, and she realized it was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Whitmore attached. "This is extraordinary. This is far beyond anything I had hoped for." She felt her cheeks warm at the praise, unused to hearing her work appreciated rather than criticized. "I am pleased that it meets your needs, James." She had started calling him James rather than Mr. Garrett during their second week, at his repeated insistence that formality seemed ridiculous given how much time they spent together. He looked up from the ledgers, his dark eyes intense as they met hers. "It exceeds my needs. Eleanor, you have a remarkable gift. I cannot understand why anyone would want you to hide it or pretend it does not exist." Something passed between them in that moment, something Eleanor could not quite name, but that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch slightly. They stood close together in the small office, surrounded by the evidence of her work. And Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that she had fallen in love with James Garrett somewhere between the morning drives and the evening returns, between his easy respect for her abilities and his genuine interest in her thoughts, between the way he smiled when he first saw her each morning and the way he always ensured she was comfortable and had everything she needed. The realization terrified her. Eleanor had long ago accepted that romantic love was not meant for women like her, women who preferred mathematics to social graces, who would rather solve equations than plan dinner parties. She had armored her heart against hope, convinced herself that independence and intellectual fulfillment would be enough. But James had slipped past her defenses without even trying, simply by treating her as an equal, by valuing her mind, by seeing her strange obsession with numbers as something wonderful rather than shameful. As summer melted into autumn, their relationship deepened in ways both subtle and profound. James began staying in the office longer, asking Eleanor to explain various mathematical concepts, not because he needed to know for the ranch, but because he genuinely wanted to understand what fascinated her so completely. She taught him about probability theory and how it could be applied to breeding programs, about statistical analysis, and how it could help predict market trends, about compound interest and long-term investment strategies. In turn, James taught her about ranch life, taking her on tours of the property when the day's bookkeeping was complete. He showed her how to read the signs of weather in the sky, how to judge the health of cattle from their behavior, how to understand the delicate balance of the prairie ecosystem. He introduced her to his favorite horse, a magnificent black gelding named Midnight, and patiently taught her to ride despite her complete lack of experience. The people of Abilene continued to gossip, of course. Speculation ran rampant about the nature of Eleanor's relationship with James, with opinions ranging from scandalous to simply inappropriate. Some predicted that James would soon tire of his peculiar employee and send her packing. Others whispered that surely something improper must be happening for an unmarried woman to spend so much time alone with an unmarried man. Eleanor tried not to let the gossip bother her, but some days it stung more than others. One particularly difficult afternoon in late September, she overheard two women in the general store discussing her in voices clearly meant to be overheard. They speculated about whether James was actually paying Eleanor for her work or whether she was providing services of an entirely different nature. The implication was clear and cruel. Eleanor fled the store without purchasing what she needed, tears of anger and humiliation burning in her eyes. She walked quickly toward the boarding house, head down, wanting only to reach the privacy of her room. She did not see James until she nearly collided with him on the wooden sidewalk. "Eleanor, what is wrong?" he asked immediately, his hands steadying her shoulders. His face creased with concern. "Nothing," she said, trying to pull away, trying to hide the tears that were now falling despite her best efforts. "I am fine." "You are not fine." His voice was gentle but firm. "Tell me what happened." The whole story spilled out of her then, all the hurt and frustration that she had been holding inside for months, years really. She told him about the women in the store, about all the whispers and judgment, about how tired she was of being treated as though loving mathematics made her somehow less of a woman, less worthy of respect and basic human dignity. James listened to everything, his jaw tightening with anger on her behalf. When she finally fell silent, he took her hand right there on Main Street, where anyone could see, a deliberate and public gesture. "Eleanor Whitmore, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met," he said clearly, his voice carrying to anyone who might be listening. "You are brilliant and dedicated and passionate about your work. Any fool who cannot see how extraordinary you are does not deserve a moment of your concern. Do you understand me?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I have something I need to ask you," James continued, still holding her hand, still looking at her as though she were something precious. "I have been trying to find the right moment, the right words, but maybe there is no perfect time. Eleanor, these past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the organized ledgers or the excellent bookkeeping, though I'm certainly grateful for those things, but because I have had the privilege of spending nearly every day with you. I love your mind, yes, but I also love your determination, your courage, your kindness, your terrible habit of chewing your pencil when you are deep in concentration, the way you laugh when you finally solve a difficult problem, the way you look at the prairie during our morning drives, as though you are seeing something beautiful that no one else can quite perceive." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "James, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Eleanor. I am in love with you. I have been for weeks now, maybe from that very first day when you looked at me so defiantly, expecting criticism and ready to fight back. I know this is sudden, and I know you may not feel the same way, but I could not let another day pass without telling you how I feel." The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, standing on that dusty sidewalk in the fading afternoon light. Eleanor felt as though her heart might overflow with the joy and relief and overwhelming love that surged through her. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself that it was foolish and impossible, but I do, James. I love you so much." The smile that lit his face was brighter than the Kansas sun. "Then marry me, Eleanor. Be my wife. I promise I will never ask you to be anything other than who you are. I promise I will support your love of mathematics. We'll celebrate it. We'll bore everyone at social gatherings by bragging about how brilliant my wife is. I promise I will stand beside you against anyone who tries to make you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are." "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." James pulled her into his arms right there on Main Street, and when he kissed her, Eleanor could hear the gasps of scandalized onlookers, but she did not care even a little bit. She was too busy kissing the man she loved, the man who loved her not in spite of her unusual passions, but because of them, because of all the things that made her uniquely herself. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Aunt Martha cried happy tears throughout the entire service, delighted that her niece had found love after all. Frank Morrison served as James's best man, having become a true friend and supporter of Eleanor in the months since she had started working at the ranch. Several of the ranch hands attended, along with a handful of townspeople who had moved past their initial judgment to recognize the genuine love between James and Eleanor. The new Mrs. Garrett moved into the ranch house, where James had prepared a special room just for her. A beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves already filled with mathematics texts he had ordered from as far away as Chicago and New York. The office building became truly hers, a place where she could work without interruption, managing the ranch's finances with increasing sophistication. But Eleanor did not limit herself to just the bookkeeping anymore. She began applying mathematical principles to every aspect of ranch management, using statistical analysis to optimize breeding programs, employing geometric calculations to maximize efficient use of grazing land, developing probability models to help predict market fluctuations and determine the best times to buy and sell cattle. Under her mathematical guidance and James's practical management, the Double G Ranch became even more profitable and well-run. More importantly, Eleanor and James built a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared dreams. They worked side by side during the day, James managing the physical operations while Eleanor handled the business side. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the prairie, talking about their day, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's company. Their first winter together brought challenges, as all Kansas winters did. A severe blizzard in January left them snowed in for nearly a week, but Eleanor found she did not mind being confined to the house with James. They spent the time cozily, reading by the fireplace, playing card games, where Eleanor taught James about game theory and probability, making love under piles of warm quilts while the wind howled outside. In February, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of joy and anxiety. She loved the idea of having a child with James, of creating a family together, but she worried about how motherhood might affect her work, her ability to continue doing what she loved. When she shared the news with James, he swept her into his arms, his face radiant with happiness. "This is wonderful, Eleanor. We are going to have a baby." "I want to keep working," she said immediately, needing him to understand. "I know that may seem strange, but the mathematics, the bookkeeping, it is part of who I am. I do not want to give it up." James cupped her face gently in his hands. "I would never ask you to give it up. We will figure out how to balance everything. Maybe we will hire a nanny to help with the baby during work hours. Maybe you will work fewer hours some days. Maybe some days you will bring the baby to the office and work with a cradle beside your desk. We will find a way, Eleanor. Whatever way works best for you and for our child, that is what partners do." Their son was born in September of 1879, during the golden beauty of a prairie autumn. They named him Gabriel James, after the brother James had lost and the father the boy would never know. Little Gabe had his mother's keen eyes and his father's dark curls, and from the very beginning he seemed to be studying the world around him with intense curiosity. True to his word, James helped Eleanor continue her work. They hired a kind young woman named Sarah from town to help with Gabe during the day. but Eleanor often brought the baby to the office anyway, working on her ledgers while he napped in a cradle James had lovingly built by hand. As Gabe grew older, he would play on a blanket beside her desk, and Eleanor would talk to him about what she was doing, explaining mathematical concepts in simple terms, never imagining that he would not be interested simply because he was young. The townspeople's opinions of Eleanor slowly began to shift. It was hard to maintain that a woman was unnatural or unwomanly when she was clearly a devoted mother and wife while also being exceptionally good at her job. Some people remained judgmental, of course, but others began to see Eleanor as she truly was, someone who had been blessed with an unusual gift and was fortunate enough to have found a way to use it. In the spring of 1881, Eleanor was approached by the owner of another ranch who had heard about her work with the Double G. He asked if she might be willing to take on his bookkeeping as well, offering generous compensation. After discussing it with James, Eleanor agreed, and soon she had a second client, then a third, then a fourth. Within 2 years, Eleanor was managing the financial records for 6 different ranches in the county, bringing in substantial income that allowed the Garretts to expand their own operation even further. What had started as one man's willingness to look past social conventions and recognize talent where he found it had blossomed into something much larger. Eleanor had built a thriving business, had proven that a woman could be both intellectually accomplished and fulfilled in her personal life, that there did not have to be a choice between using one's mind and having a family. In 1883, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with her mother's delicate features and her father's ready smile. They named her Carolyn May, and she proved to be just as curious and clever as her older brother. Eleanor would sit with both children in her lap in the evenings, reading to them from mathematics books alongside the fairy tales, never once suggesting that either subject was more appropriate than the other. Young Gabe showed an early aptitude for numbers that delighted his mother. By the age of 5, he was already helping Eleanor with simple calculations, clearly inheriting her love of mathematics. James would shake his head in amused wonder, watching his wife and son bent over a slate board together, working through problems with identical expressions of intense concentration. But it was not just mathematics that flourished in the Garrett household. James taught both children about ranching, about the importance of hard work and integrity, about respecting the land and the animals in their care. Eleanor taught them about the power of knowledge, about standing firm in the face of judgment, about being true to who they were regardless of what others thought they should be. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and family life. The Double G continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful ranches in Kansas, known not just for its excellent cattle and horses, but also for its meticulous business practices. Eleanor's bookkeeping business grew as well, and she eventually had to hire an assistant, a young woman from town named Margaret, who had a natural head for figures and was desperately grateful for the opportunity to use her abilities in a meaningful way. Eleanor never forgot what it felt like to be judged and dismissed for loving something that society deemed inappropriate. She made it her mission to encourage other women who showed interest or aptitude in mathematics or business, writing letters of recommendation, providing advice and mentorship, sometimes even offering financial support to help them pursue education or business opportunities. In 1889, Eleanor was invited to speak at a women's college in Missouri about the practical applications of mathematics in business management. James encouraged her to accept, insisting that he could manage both the ranch and the children for the few days she would be gone. The experience was transformative for Eleanor, standing before a room full of young women and seeing the hope and excitement in their faces as she described her work, her life, the possibilities that existed for women who were willing to push past social constraints and demand the right to use their minds fully. She returned home to find James waiting at the train station with Gabe and Caroline, now 6 and 4 years old respectively. Gabe had made her a welcome home card covered in mathematical equations, and Caroline had picked a bouquet of prairie flowers that were only slightly wilted from being clutched in her small fist for too long. Eleanor swept all 3 of them into her arms, overwhelmed with love and gratitude for this family that had grown from one cowboy's willingness to see past social conventions to the woman beneath. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and James sat together on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The prairie stretched out before them under a canopy of brilliant stars, and Eleanor rested her head on her husband's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked softly. "Marrying me, living out here, choosing this life? You could have gone to that women's college, gotten a degree, perhaps become a professor or researcher." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, the worry that somehow he had limited her rather than freed her. "James Garrett, you gave me something far more valuable than any degree or position could have offered. You gave me the freedom to be myself completely and without apology. You gave me partnership and respect and love. You gave me a family and a home and work that I find meaningful. Most importantly, you gave me the courage to stop hiding who I am and to believe that being different is not the same as being wrong. I have never regretted a single moment of our life together." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the love and commitment of their years together and all the promise of the years still to come. They had built something beautiful together, something that defied the narrow expectations of their time, something that proved love and respect could create space for people to become their fullest, truest selves. As the years continued to unfold, the Garrett family became a fixture in their community, respected and admired for their integrity, their hard work, and their willingness to challenge outdated notions about what women could or should do. Young women from all over the county began seeking out Eleanor for advice and mentorship, and the small office that had once held only chaos and possibility became a place where dreams were nurtured and futures were planned. In 1891, tragedy struck when a particularly severe drought threatened ranchers throughout Kansas. Many operations failed that year, unable to sustain their herds without adequate water and grazing land. But the Double G survived, largely because Eleanor's meticulous financial planning had created reserves for exactly such emergencies. Her mathematical projections had predicted the possibility of extended drought based on historical weather patterns, and she had convinced James to set aside extra funds and make conservative decisions about herd size in the years leading up to the disaster. When neighboring ranchers began losing their spreads, unable to pay their debts, James and Eleanor were able to help several families avoid complete ruin, offering loans with fair terms and practical advice about financial management. Eleanor spent countless hours working with these families, teaching them basic bookkeeping and budgeting, helping them understand how to plan for both prosperity and hardship. The gratitude of these families went a long way towards silencing the last remaining critics who still thought a woman had no business involving herself in such matters. It was hard to argue that Eleanor should stay home and focus on traditionally feminine pursuits when her mathematical expertise had literally saved farms and kept families from starving. By 1895, when Gabe was 16 and Caroline was 14, both children had grown into remarkable young people. Gabe had indeed inherited his mother's mathematical gift, and he was already helping Eleanor with her bookkeeping business during summer months when he was home from the boarding school in St. Louis where he was studying advanced mathematics and business. He spoke of one day attending university back east, perhaps even pursuing a degree in mathematics, and Eleanor glowed with pride at the thought of her son having opportunities that had never been available to her. Caroline had developed a passion for veterinary medicine, an unusual interest for a young woman, but one that her parents supported wholeheartedly. She worked alongside the ranch hands, learning everything she could about animal health and husbandry, and she had already proven herself invaluable during difficult calvings and when treating sick or injured animals. James had begun corresponding with a veterinary college in Iowa that had recently started accepting female students, exploring the possibility of Carolyn attending once she was old enough. In the evenings, the four Garretts would sit together around the dinner table, discussing mathematics and ranching and medicine and politics, debating ideas and sharing dreams. Eleanor would sometimes pause in the middle of these conversations, overcome with emotion at the realization of what she and James had built together. They had created not just a successful ranch and business, but a family where every member was encouraged to pursue their passions regardless of whether those passions fit neatly into society's expectations. The turn of the century brought changes to Abilene and to the American West more broadly. The wild frontier days were fading into memory, replaced by increasing civilization and modernization. Railroads crisscrossed the land, telegraphs connected distant towns, and automobiles were beginning to appear on streets that had once known only horses and wagons. Through all these changes, the Double G Ranch adapted and thrived. James proved just as skilled at navigating the changing landscape of modern ranching as he had been at building the operation in the first place, and Eleanor's mathematical expertise became even more valuable as business grew more complex and interconnected. In 1902, on their 23rd wedding anniversary, James surprised Eleanor with a gift that left her speechless. He had commissioned a special leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with both their initials intertwined. Inside, he had written a dedication that brought tears to her eyes. "To my brilliant wife," the inscription read, "who proved that love is not about finding someone who fits the mold society has created, but about finding someone who helps you break that mold and become who you were always meant to be." These pages are for whatever equations, calculations, theories, or simply thoughts you wish to record. May they be filled with the same passion and genius that you have brought to every day of our life together. Forever yours, James. Eleanor threw her arms around her husband's neck, holding him close, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and prairie wind that would forever mean home to her. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," he responded, his voice rough with emotion. "You made me believe in the impossible. Eleanor, you showed me that the greatest achievements come not from following the prescribed path, but from having the courage to forge your own way." Their children, both home for the anniversary celebration, watched their parents with the slightly embarrassed but deeply pleased expressions of young adults seeing their parents still so obviously in love. Gabe, now 23, and recently graduated from university with highest honors in mathematics, had brought home a young woman he was courting, a fellow mathematics student named Ada. Caroline, 20, was in her second year at veterinary college and had developed a reputation as one of the most dedicated students in her program. The family gathered that evening for a celebratory dinner, the table laden with food, the conversation flowing easily between generations. They toasted to love and perseverance, to family and dreams fulfilled, to the courage it took to be different, and the grace required to let others be different too. As the years continued their steady march forward, James and Eleanor grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces marking with the lines of long years and much laughter. James's hands grew more gnarled from decades of hard work, but they were still steady when they held Eleanor's each evening as they sat on their porch. Eleanor's eyes required spectacles now for the close work of her ledgers, but they still sparkled with intelligence and curiosity and joy. Gabe married his Ada in 1904, and they settled in Chicago, where he took a position as a professor of mathematics at a prestigious university. He published papers on applied mathematics that cited his mother's practical work with ranch bookkeeping as inspiration, bringing Eleanor recognition from academic circles she had never sought but deeply appreciated. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and Gabe raised them with the same encouragement to pursue their passions that he had received from his parents. Caroline completed her veterinary studies and returned to Kansas, where she opened a practice treating large animals throughout the county. She never married, declaring that her work was fulfilling enough on its own, and Eleanor supported this decision completely, understanding that not every woman needed or wanted a traditional family structure to live a complete and happy life. Caroline became a frequent visitor to the Double G, treating the ranch's animals and spending long evenings talking with her parents about everything and nothing. In 1912, Eleanor received a letter from the Women's College where she had spoken decades earlier. They were establishing an endowed scholarship for female students studying mathematics and business, and they wanted to name it in her honor. The Eleanor Garrett Scholarship for Mathematical Excellence would provide full funding for one exceptional student each year, giving young women opportunities to pursue advanced education regardless of their financial circumstances. Eleanor wept when she read the letter, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her struggle, her refusal to diminish herself, her determination to live authentically had paved the way for other women to do the same. She thought of that young woman she had been sitting on a bench outside the general store with her mathematics notebook, bracing herself for yet another round of criticism and judgment. She wished she could reach back through time and tell that frightened, defiant girl that everything was going to work out better than she could possibly imagine. James found her crying in her office, the letter clutched in her hand. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms and let her cry against his chest, understanding tears of joy and gratitude and vindication when he saw them. "You changed the world, Eleanor," he murmured into her hair. "Maybe not the whole world, but you changed your corner of it. You made it possible for women to imagine different futures for themselves. That is no small thing." "We changed it together," she corrected, pulling back to look at him through tear-blurred eyes. "You were the one who took the first step, who looked past all the judgment and saw value in what I could do. You gave me the chance to prove myself." "And you were the one brave enough to take that chance," James responded. "Never discount your own courage, love." They stood together in that office, surrounded by decades of carefully maintained ledgers that represented not just financial transactions, but a life built on mutual respect and love, a revolutionary act in its own quiet way. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars, and Eleanor felt such profound contentment that it seemed impossible her heart could contain it all. The Double G Ranch continued to operate successfully into the 1920s, even as both James and Eleanor gradually stepped back from daily management, training younger ranch hands to take over the physical operations while maintaining Eleanor's mathematical systems. Her bookkeeping business had been passed on to Margaret, who had become a successful businesswoman in her own right, managing financial records for ranches and businesses throughout Kansas and beyond. James and Eleanor spent their later years enjoying the fruits of their labor, traveling occasionally to visit Gabe and his family in Chicago, hosting Carolyn and her various nieces and nephews at the ranch during summers, sitting on their beloved porch watching sunsets that never seemed to lose their beauty no matter how many times they witnessed them. In the spring of 1928, James fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of Caroline and the local doctors, his lungs, weakened by decades of hard work in all weather, could not fight off the infection. He died on a warm May evening with Eleanor holding his hand, their children and grandchildren gathered around his bedside. Eleanor was 72 years old, and she had loved James Garrett for 50 years, married to him for 49 of those. The grief of losing him was profound and overwhelming, of physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but even in her sorrow, she could not regret a single moment of their time together. He had given her the greatest gift one person can give another, the freedom to be authentically herself, and that gift had shaped not just her life, but the lives of countless women who came after her. She continued living at the ranch, refusing Caroline's gentle suggestions that she might be more comfortable in town or living with one of her children. The Double G was her home, filled with memories of James, and she wanted to spend her remaining years surrounded by those memories, feeling close to the man she would love until her dying day. Eleanor lived for another 12 years, remaining sharp and active well into her 80s. She continued to work on mathematical problems purely for the joy of it, maintained correspondence with mathematicians and businesswomen across the country, welcomed a steady stream of visitors who wanted to meet the woman who had become something of a legend, the eccentric Eastern girl who had come west and proved that loving mathematics too much was not a flaw but a gift. She died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1940, at the age of 84. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, from old ranch hands who remembered when she first arrived as Mr. Garrett's peculiar bookkeeper, to successful businesswomen who credited Eleanor with inspiring them to pursue their own unconventional paths, to young students who held scholarships bearing her name. Gabe delivered the eulogy, speaking of his mother's brilliance and courage, her kindness and determination, the love story she had lived with his father that proved the best relationships are built on respect and partnership. Caroline added her own remembrances, describing Eleanor's unwavering support for her decision to become a veterinarian, her mother's insistence that there was no dream too big or too strange for a woman to pursue if she was willing to work for it. Eleanor Whitmore Garrett was laid to rest beside James on a hill overlooking the prairie they had both loved, under a sky vast and blue. Her headstone bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of her remarkable life. She loved mathematics, and she was loved in return. She refused to be less than she was, and in doing so, showed others they could be more than the world told them they could be. The Double G Ranch continued operating for another generation before eventually being sold to a conservation trust that preserved it as a historical site. But Eleanor's legacy extended far beyond the physical property. The scholarship in her name continued to provide opportunities for young women studying mathematics for decades into the future. Her pioneering work in applying mathematical principles to ranch management influenced agricultural business practices across the country. Most importantly, her life served as an enduring example that passion and authenticity, when met with love and respect, can overcome even the most rigid social barriers. In the small museum that was eventually established at the preserved ranch site, visitors could see Eleanor's original ledgers, their pages still crisp and clear, the numbers marching in neat columns that represented not just financial transactions, but one woman's refusal to let society dictate the boundaries of her life. They could read letters from James expressing his admiration and love for his brilliant wife. They could view photographs of the family, Eleanor always with a slight smile, as though she carried within her the knowledge of something wonderful that the rest of the world had not quite figured out yet. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the prairie, people swore they could almost see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together. A cowboy and a mathematician who had found in each other the rarest of gifts, someone who said not change who you are, but be exactly who you are, and I will love you for it. Their love story had started with judgment and ended with triumph, proving that sometimes the most radical act is simply insisting on being yourself and finding someone brave enough to love you for it. The story of Eleanor and James Garrett became a testament to the transformative power of acceptance, the courage required to live authentically, and the profound beauty that unfolds when two people choose to build a life based on mutual respect and unconditional love rather than conformity to social expectations.